Hello and welcome to Connected With Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments, and business trends shaping the global economy. This is the 20th episode of the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Series, and I'm Chris Schott, a partner in the healthcare and life sciences practice in our Washington, D.C. office. I focus my practice on all things market access, and that includes manufacturer compliance related to the Medicaid Rebate program, Medicare Parts B and D, and the 340B drug pricing program. I also advise on current policy initiatives such as the proposed Most Favored Nation drug pricing policy, the ongoing implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as state law developments. Joining me is Danny Machado, an associate in our Washington, D.C. office.
Hey, Chris. Awesome to be here. And quick reminder that we are publishing the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Digest every second Monday. So search for Latham Drug Pricing Digest to find it online, or if you want it in your inbox at the start of every other week, click on the subscription link in the podcast notes. We just actually published issue number 55.
Thanks, Danny. And today we're very happy to welcome Nicole Liffrig Molife as a guest on our podcast. Nicole is a counsel in our DC office. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. It's always a pleasure collaborating with you. My practice focuses on fraud and abuse considerations related to market access, product launch, and commercial strategies. I advise on sales and marketing activities, commercial contracts, and patient access and support programs. So happy to be here today.
Thanks, and thank you for joining the podcast today. In each episode, we focus on a specific topic that is relevant to market access, drug pricing, or the pharmaceutical and healthcare sectors more broadly. And after discussing the substance, we ask the question, which Olympic sport is it like? And we have the list of Olympic sports here to see which most resembles the topic in terms of strategy, complexity, or, of course, level of conflict. So, Danny, what is our topic for today?
Our topic for today, Chris, is that the largest drug pricing conference of the year just concluded in Chicago. And this is the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program Summit 2025. So as we've done following other conferences in the past, we'll try to provide a bit of a readout from Chicago. Nicole, I wonder if we can start with you. What were your impressions just in general from the conference?
Danny, this was my first time attending the conference. The sessions were excellent and covered all of the moment policy changes facing manufacturers today. It was evident that manufacturers, regardless of their size and stage of development, shared a common goal at the conference. And that common goal was trying to understand and assess the impact of major policy changes that are happening in our backyard, Chris and Danny, here in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm glad it worked out well for you at this conference. I mean, this, in my mind, appears to have been the largest in terms of number of attendees. And if you go through the agenda, it really seems all the stakeholders were there and had speakers on the different panels and different slots. Manufacturers, like you mentioned, also consultants, of course, outside counsel, but also government. I think we're seeing more of an uptick in government attendees compared to at least some of the prior years when that had dwindled down quite a bit.
Wow, awesome to hear from both of you that, this was well attended and that it was a good conference overall. I wonder if we can start talking about some of the key topics from the conference. And Nicole, what did you think were some of the prominent issues this time around?
Danny, one of the key topics was CMS's proposed revisions to the bona fide service fee definition for purposes of average sales price, ASP calculations, and the related oversight of fair market value methodologies. CMS proposed significant changes in this area, specifying the type of fair market value methodologies that companies can use and requiring manufacturers to conduct fair market value assessments as frequently as a renewal period of the underlying contract. These proposals, if implemented, have significant implications for market access and commercial contracts.
Yeah, and I definitely agree this was one of the more exciting topics that drew more attention. I think one of the keynote speakers focused her remarks almost exclusively on physician fee schedule. And just maybe by way of background, whenever CMS has regulated in the Medicare Part B average sales price ASP space, the agency has done that not as separate standalone rulemaking, but always as part of its annual physician fee schedule that gets published, like I said, on this annual cycle. And so this year, prompted by reasons that we can't quite understand, CMS thought the time was right to address two areas of longstanding practice Like Nicole mentioned, the bona fide service fee definition with a lot of focus on the fair market value prong of that test, but also the bundled sale definition. And CMS is providing some clarity there and frankly also adding new compliance obligations, particularly in the bona fide service fee space that we hadn't really seen before. So the comment period on the physician fee schedule ended earlier in September, and we're now in the wait and see mode to see when the final physician fee schedule comes out, which typically we see that in the third quarter. As proposed, a lot of these bona fide service fee changes had an effective date of January 1st. So there was a lot of talk at this conference how to prepare for that, even in the absence of a final rule. What are the next steps to get ready for that? And then the unanswerable question, assuming that this becomes final on the Medicare side, what will the Medicaid side of the house do? Because if this becomes final on the Medicare side, there will be a bit of a mismatch between the Medicare and Medicaid sides of CMS, where on Medicaid, there's the older guidance from 2016, where CMS declined to define fair market value or provide more details around the fair market value process. And now we have Medicare pushing forward with providing some of those details. So quite a few open questions for manufacturers to tackle, assuming this becomes finalized as it had been proposed.
Well, sounds like we definitely need to keep an eye for the November final rule when the physician fee schedule comes out. Chris, when we did the last podcast, and that was a readout of the Philadelphia sister conference to the Chicago conference, Most Favored Nation, or MFN, was a key topic. Was that the case again this time in Chicago?
Absolutely. This was completely top of mind. As I said on my panel during the conference, I'll repeat it here now. Today, there is no legal basis in the United States for international reference pricing or for its most extreme flavor, which is the most favored nation approach. What we are dealing with is the administration trying to cajole and frankly coerce manufacturers into adopting some sort of MFN drug pricing policy. So the most recent developments here were letters that President Trump sent to 17 pharma manufacturers with the date of July 31st, although the letters in two places did refer to all manufacturers. So while they were addressed to 17 specific companies, they seem to have at least intend to have a broader reach. So like I said, those letters were dated July 31st. They called for certain actions around drug pricing within 60 days, which would mean the end of September, the end of this month. After that, on August 29th, there was a lengthy cabinet meeting where RFK Jr., the Secretary of HHS, said, and I quote directly, "We are deep into most favored nation status negotiations with 14 companies." And that's noteworthy because, as we know, the only legal foundation for the federal government negotiating drug prices is the Inflation Reduction Act's Medicare price negotiation. And yes, there's VA-FSS contracting where there's negotiation as well. But that's been going on for years and is not the center stage. So here we have RFK talking about deep negotiations with 14 undisclosed companies. And again, we're in a world of no legal basis for this. Cajoling, coercing seems to be the approach the administration is trying to take. But remember here that things are potentially moving very fast in this area, and it's completely unpredictable what the Trump administration is going to do here. Of course, also part of the coerce and cajole strategy. So the listeners should bear in mind that we're speaking here as of the date of this recording, which is September 23rd, and things could change by the time you get to listen to this podcast. Nicole, on this broad MFN topic, is there anything else that you heard at the conference on this issue?
Yeah, Chris, I agree with your comments. It definitely was a hot topic at the conference. I think something to note for our manufacturer listeners who currently today do not sell products outside the US, this is still an important issue for them to track and stay on top of so that they're aware of the types of arrangements, such as licensing agreements, that could be implicated by this policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because if you are a US company, how would you enter ex-US markets? It is going to happen through typically a license. And so that is where a lot of practical questions are likely to come up.
Thank you both. Those are incredible topics. And yes, the most favored nation is something to keep an eye on. Nicole, you focus your practice, among other things, on the anti-kickback statute, or the AKS, and you also keep track of enforcement trends. Were there any developments of note that were discussed at the conference?
Yes, Danny, great question. I think we continue to see patient assistance programs and speaker programs under scrutiny. The enforcement actions in the last year highlight the significant regulatory risks that manufacturers face when developing patient support programs to enhance access to their products or use speaker programs to promote their products. I think as a compliance practice, manufacturers should regularly evaluate those programs in light of recent enforcement actions and OIG guidance to identify opportunities to further mitigate their regulatory risk in these areas.
That's super helpful. Absolutely agree that we have to keep an eye on the enforcement trends as well. Chris, any other themes of note at the conference?
Well, of course, there was discussion around the 340B drug pricing program, so-called rebate model.
Oh yeah, as always, we cannot have a drug pricing conversation without 340B coming up. What did we hear?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the perpetual hot topic. So in my personal view, the rebate model that HRSA published recently is a big nothing burger because it limits participation to those drugs that are subject to a maximum fair price under the IRA. And as we know, for 2026, that's 10 drugs. And even then, the legal obligation is to provide the drug at the lower of the 340B ceiling price or the max fair price. So even out of the 10 drugs, it remains to be seen what volume of 340B utilization is actually going to be taking place there. So in my mind, the rebate model guidance was issued to fulfill the promise HRSA had made in the litigation around rebate models, and I don't see much of an impact from it. But certainly at the conference, other stakeholders had different views. There are certainly other outside counsel who think, even though in its current version, the rebate model is somewhat limited, it might form the foundation for future developments. I am not super optimistic in that regard. Another 340B development was a Congressional Budget Office report that was published recently. The interesting sentence there, and I'm quoting, is the 340B program encourages behaviors, including the prescription of more and higher priced drugs, the expansion of services, and the integration of hospitals and offsite clinics that tend to increase federal spending. And if you want to read a little bit more about this report, check out Drug Pricing Digest number 55, where we have a blurb on that topic.
There we go. Another plug for the digest. And yes, 340B can never get away from it. And Nicole, are there any action items or calls to action that you took away from the conference?
Yeah, Danny, great question. I think for our manufacturer listeners, the first action item would be to keep your market access and commercial teams informed of these policy developments. For example, now's the time to start evaluating your business practices and contracts that might be implicated by the new bona fide service fee and fair market value proposals, and assessing the potential impact and starting to plan should that proposal be implemented. Waiting for the final rule to come out later this year isn't optimal given the far-reaching impact of these proposals. Chris, anything else you would add?
Yeah, this theme of tracking developments and preparing, maybe having a task force that focus on different topics, that was definitely a theme that ran throughout this entire conference. So the panel I moderated, I had two guests, two in-house counsel on my panel, one from a company already in business, one preclinical. And from that panel also, I heard that tracking and keeping on top of the many, many ongoing developments that relate to drug pricing is really a key. And if you didn't attend the panel, it should be available online. So if you were an attendee at this conference, you should have access and you can watch the panel later online. The other thing I would add is get your litigation support lined up. As I've said, we're in this world of cajole and coerce. And in this environment, likely the only way to get the voice of industry heard is through litigation. You may have heard me say on prior podcast episodes, we are faced with CMS 2.0. That's a trend that began during the Biden administration, and it's just been exacerbated now with the current administration. There's a German saying I will share with you, Bücken reizt zum Schlag, which we can translate as kowtowing provokes a beating, or bending down engenders lashes, whichever way you want to translate it. And it doesn't seem that the Trump administration is rewarding submissiveness these days. So I would say it's not the first go-to solution, but definitely have your litigation team ready to go. If there's an issue that is a pain point in your organization.
Yep. Well, Nicole, Chris, thanks to you both for sharing your takeaways from the conference. Very insightful and important for our listeners to be aware of all the recent events going on in the drug pricing industry. So with that, we go to the question that we had posed at the very beginning. Which Olympic sport is it like?
Danny, this is my favorite part of your podcast. My choice is steeplechase. This is a horse racing competition that involves obstacles and has been part of the Olympics since the 1920s. Manufacturers today are trying to clear policy barriers, hurdles, and other obstacles that are in their way in impacting manufacturers' ability to successfully develop and launch innovative therapies. Danny, what is your pick today?
I think that's a great one, Nicole. Hearing you both talk about the various issues at play in the conference, and knowing that over the last several episodes we've gone through quite a few sports, I was looking through the list of Olympic sports and I saw judo, the Japanese martial arts sport. So I opened it up and it says, the aim of judo is to throw the opponent to the ground with force or hold them down for a certain amount of time. And boy, did that make me think of government activity like the most favored nation and similar kind of forceful actions that we've been seeing coming from the executive branch recently. As Chris mentioned, we can talk about the legal authority of the federal government and whether they have it to implement some of these really strong pricing controls. But at the end of the day, it's like the government's going to test its strength to see if it can hold down the pharma industry long enough for the industry to give in. So judo, that's the sport that I'm going with. Chris, over to you. What sport do you think it's like?
Yeah, I love it. I think we have a nice progression here with Nicole navigating obstacle course. That definitely makes sense. Danny's going to the more aggressive judo actual competition. I'm going to go to the next level. I'm going to say ice hockey. And I haven't attended that many ice hockey games, but I do understand that one of the, if not highlights, but possibilities is that fights will break out on the field. And at least for a few minutes there, the rules kind of go out the window and people do all sorts of things. That's, I think, the environment that we're entering here, where we have rules up to a certain point, but we're finding that there are these spaces where the rules don't seem to really hold that tightly, and people are using their hockey sticks in all sorts of aggressive ways. So yeah, I think ice hockey would be my choice. And I think that nicely wraps up our podcast. Danny, where are we going for the after party?
Well, I was going to say we should go see a hockey game now, but Nicole and I actually have been talking about our love of sushi. And in particular, the two of us have had our eye on Nobu, which is over in the West End. What do you guys say?
I think we should do it. Chris?
Definitely on board. It's a nice day. Let's walk over there right now. Excellent. I think that wraps up our podcast. Thanks to Nicole for joining us today and sharing her insights and impressions from the Chicago conference. And thanks to Danny for being a moderator. And thank you to our listeners for checking out the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Series, which is part of our Connected with Latham podcast. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcasts on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. If you have questions or would like additional information, please email us using the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins, LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins, LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins, LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins, LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.